All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to go over a practical breakdown of a handful of HR essentials for your small business. My name is Steph. I'm an HR shareholder here at Lutz. This is Muse, outsourced HR associate. For those of you that are not familiar with Lutz, we are a business solutions firm born and raised in Nebraska. We have offices in Omaha, Lincoln, and Grand Island. And over the years, we have developed multiple divisions to serve our current and future clients. Luke and I represent our outsourced HR offering, which provides HR support and strategy to small and mid-sized businesses. And much of the content that we have here today really is put together and represents the types of items that we're currently helping clients with on a day-to-day basis. Again, we are excited to have such a big group here on the call today. As we look at who is on the call, we have a lot of different sizes of organizations, people in a lot of different roles, whether you are the business owner, the person wearing the HR hat, but maybe not trained in HR, or someone who's specifically dedicated to the HR role. We also have a lot of industries represented. So we recognize that one size does not fit all when it comes to HR. But our hope is that you can come away with at least a few ideas, thoughts, or tactics that will help you with the people side of your business. Before we dive into the details, here is our agenda for the next hour. We want to first talk about the importance of clarity in the workplace. And we'll take this concept through the different stages of the employee experience. As a reminder, the employee experience is the journey that employees take from the day they hear about your organization all the way through to the time that they exit. And we'll start by focusing on intentional actions that you can take when recruiting new employees and how you can create meaningful onboarding experiences. We'll then explore how you can integrate policies and structure while also focusing and building your culture. We'll move then into the development and retention elements of the employee experience as we walk through the importance of compensation benchmarking and benefit strategies. And we'll conclude with offboarding best practices and the importance of communication, feedback, and accountability. We've got a lot of work to do.
We do.
To cover. So
We'll dive right in.
We'll dive right in. Please, if you do have any, we will save time for questions if we have any time at the end. If you do have any burning questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them as soon as we can. So you can always email us directly as well. All right, so let's get started. We want to first talk about clarity in the workplace. This is a topic that's getting a lot of attention and it's rising importance in the workplace today because many old workplace assumptions, assumptions that I grew up in anyway, are starting to fade a little bit. For those of you that can remember or still feel some of these things, the think sink or swim mentality, think I had to figure it out, so you do too, or think no news is good news. These are starting to fade away. People are tired of guessing. And in a 2024 study conducted by Gallup, they found that only 46% of US employees strongly agree they know what's expected of them at work. And why is that? And why is clarity so important these days? A few reasons that resonate with us. One is that work is more complex and noisier than ever. Employees are processing way more information with a lot less context than in the past. And when those expectations are clear, people fill the gaps in themselves. And that's what causes mistakes, frustration, misunderstanding, and burnout. The second is psychological safety depends on it. People do better when they know what success looks like, how decisions are made, and where they have autonomy and where they don't. And accountability is also another topic that is getting a lot of the spotlight these days. And you can't hold people accountable without being clear, or that feels unfair. And it only works when roles are defined and we have measurable goals and when feedback is timely. So clarity really is a retention strategy. It is no longer a good to have.
Right.
It is more of a must have. And so successful organizations today aren't necessarily doing more, they are being clearer.
Yeah.
Clearer roles, clearer goals, clearer priorities, clearer decision making. So we want to encourage you to ask yourself at the onset of this webinar, does your communication, documentation, and reinforcement of your expectations at your organization foster clarity or foster confusion? It's a good thing to ask yourself. And as we move the employee through the employee experience through this presentation, we'll lay out clear actionable steps for how you could infuse that clarity into your processes. Some quick examples, which we'll dive into a little further, is establishing expectations, even during the recruiting process, but particularly during onboarding, being able to reinforce those throughout the employee experience. We want to make sure to create clear policies that reduce confusion and mitigate compliance risk. And then because we're bombarded with all sorts of information, sometimes just providing our employees with the information isn't enough. We have to take it further by giving them actionable steps and items and direction. So you'll hear us talk about clarity a lot during this webinar.
Yep, absolutely.
So it is a thread that connects every stage of the employee experience. So with that, hand it over to you, Luke.
Yep. So as Steph had said, really clarity is going to be the framework for how we go about this conversation. So we are going to touch on a couple of the initial phases of the employee experience here, starting with hiring and onboarding. These are two of the components that really lay the foundation for HR professionals and even business owners who are managing those HR responsibilities and wearing that HR hat. Small businesses are often moving fast, and so recruiting decisions can sometimes be made reactively. And our goal for you during this call and webinar today is to really kind of think about how you can be more intentional about these initial hiring and onboarding stages, but then the rest of the stages of the employee experience. Doing so is really going to set your organization up for long-term success. When we talk about hiring, we always frame it as intentional recruitment. And so with intentional recruitment, it's important to gain an understanding of the changing labor market. It's always something to keep your eye on as every organization needs talent to really execute their work. And so in the last couple of years, we're seeing a shift to it now being an employer's market. Really, after the pandemic, those employers are resetting expectations, and we're starting to see employees have less of the advantage, as we say, as they're looking for new roles and opportunities. We are seeing, again, these companies reset those expectations and also place a higher emphasis on the need to hire with AI, really using AI as an enhancement to what employees can already accomplish. If you have been keeping an eye on recent news articles, you may have seen the term job hugging. This is one of our favorite terms nowadays in terms of how the labor market is being described. But job hugging is ultimately employees are more closely associated with their roles because of the uncertainty of the labor market. They're less likely to go about applying for other jobs that they may have in the past if it was more so an employee's market. And this is drastically different than job hopping, whereas, employees do have that flexibility to go from, applying for one role to another, trying to land a new job, whether it be for flexibility, the benefits, really any number of reasons there. So both of these really contribute to just an overall expected slower growth in the labor market for the coming years. A couple more components of intentional recruitment that we'd like to bring your attention to. One, we'll start with proactive sourcing. Really setting up those talent pipelines, even as a small business, is going to really set you up for success in the long run. Creating those relationships with potential candidates is going to widen your pool of qualified talent, even if you don't necessarily need to hire for a position right now. You then kind of have another candidate pool to lean into should you need it. Engaging passive candidates in particular underneath this proactive sourcing is another important element. This is one of the most underutilized realms of proactive sourcing. For instance, in 2024, 75%, more than 75% of Lutz Talent's placements in our talent division came from the true recruitment of passive candidates. And so passive candidates are those candidates and individuals who are not actively applying for other roles, but they are interested in hearing more about them, should they be asked, and they will maybe consider those opportunities if somebody just simply reaches out to them. Retention and growth-oriented hiring are a few more aspects to consider as you go about intentionally recruiting candidates. Again, hiring should not necessarily fill an immediate need. Rather, you should really look to the long term and assess the current position of your team's workload and capacity, any hiring alternatives that may also be available to you. And these are really just, again, considerations as you go about shaping those initial stages of the employee experience. The last two that we'll touch on regarding recruitment here are the infusion of culture in job postings, the interview process, and the job offer. As you go about recruiting candidates, if you give them signs of what your culture is all about at those initial stages, it may really open up their eyes to become even more interested in your company. It may also detract them, and it may they may then have the opportunity to self-select out of that application process. So really giving them a glimpse of what your culture is at the beginning of the recruiting process is a great precursor then into understanding if they are the right fit for the role. Our last bullet point here is all about clarity. Again, having those structured interview guides and job descriptions really these set the candidate up for success when they come in the door on day one. And again, it provides them clarity in the application process. It's also going to, again, reduce any bias that may seep its way through that process and improve hiring accuracy. If your hiring managers are using the same structured interview guides, then the candidate pool that you're likely being then transformed into employees is going to be somewhat similar. And again, kind of all goes back to reducing that bias and providing clarity, not only for the employee, but for you, the employer. The next kind of phase of the employee experience after recruiting is all about bringing in the employee into the office, or whether it be onboarding them virtually. These are all critical elements, those initial stages of bringing an employee into a company. We want to start by acknowledging just the impact that onboarding has on employees. Again, looking to Gallup, they have recently found that only 12% US employees say their company does a good job of onboarding, yet 70% of employees who had exceptional onboarding experiences say they have the best possible job. These employees are also 2.6 times as likely to be extremely satisfied with their workplace. So when we think about this, there's really a clear opportunity here for you to evaluate and reflect on your own onboarding process. I'd ask you to consider if your onboarding process is built to integrate the candidate, or is it built to get them working as fast as possible to alleviate those immediate needs? As we see here, Gallup has found that, again, those hiring managers and those who have great onboarding experiences are much more likely to stay. And so as you invest more time on the front end, you really see it pay off in retaining your employees. A few ideas here to consider as you onboard for impact. On that employee's first day, ensuring that they are given a clear plan, providing that clarity on the front end without having them have to ask you really gives the candidate a good idea of what they can expect. It also reduces any worries they may bring into that first day. And so again, that clarity is something that everyone is looking for in those even initial stages of onboarding. Providing them some company swag too is always a great way to get them excited about the new role. A t-shirt, a tumbler, a pen, whether it be mailed to their house or ready to go on their first day, just providing them that company swag. I think it's a great way to make employees feel included and like there's a part of something bigger there. Ready to use technology again on that first day is something that we stress more so than not. It's always frustrating as you, the employer, I'm sure, have a new employee that you may want to get onboarded right away, even if it's just to expose them to some of the systems that they will be using down the line. But when that technology is not set up, it can be frustrating for the employer, but then also for the candidate too, and being a little bit bummed that they were bringing all this excitement into the role, but it was hard to really execute upon their arrival. A team lunch on that first day, and really considering the possibility of assigning a buddy or a coach for that new employee is a great way to expose the culture and some of those things that are hard to pick up on as they just have those initial phone calls down the line. 30, 60, 90-day check-ins are a great way to reinforce and set expectations with the new employee. Again, providing those structured times for clarity in expectations for the role really set you up for being able to hold someone accountable down the line. Steph said it earlier, but if you're not able to have those initial conversations, then it's really hard to hold someone accountable. And so ensuring that you are using that time in those initial onboarding stages to have those conversations is a great way to set those expectations and provide clarity again. So now that we've kind of talked on onboarding and hiring, hiring and onboarding, we're going to now shift into a few more phases of the employee experience here with building culture-driven systems.
So, and as much as you hear us say clarity, you'll hear us say culture.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Culture, right?
Absolutely.
And I think, we've done a lot of webinars about how important it is to define your culture. So we're building off of that assumption that you have done that. But when we talk about building a culture-driven system, this means that the way that we get work done, the way we make decisions, the way we behave, the processes, the expectations, these are intentionally guided by our shared values and norms, not just by HR policy or rules or any sort of hierarchy. So if more practically speaking, this means that people know how to act even when there isn't a policy for every situation. And that is because you've been clear on your values and you've been clear on what is expected within the community of your organization. So when people behave, you reward the right kind of behavior, you give feedback to the not so right kind of behavior, and your hiring, your performance, your feedback and recognition all reflect those expectations. So culture then acts as a default operating system. And so even when leaders aren't in the room, people know what is expected of them. So that's what we're talking about when we say culture-driven system. And why this matters is that if you can really focus on your culture and integrate it within the limits of the law, this enables faster, better decisions. It creates more accountability without having a lot of oversight. And if you have a small business, chances are you may not have a lot of resources and people to be managing and having all of that oversight. And if you are a growing organization, which many of you are, this is a way that you're going to be able to scale on the people side of the business. It's build trust and clarity across teams. So now is the right time to get this in place as a small business. Again, if you are growing, focusing on culture, what is it that you are trying to build when it comes to the values, norms, mission, vision of your organization? And this is going to turn that everyday behavior, and it's going to make sure that it's led by your values. Again, even when no one's in the room to watch. So how do we do this? Again, when you have policy, like an HR policy or rule or legislation, and you combine it with the norms of your culture, those policies can be enablers versus blockers and barriers to engagement and performance. So that's the next stage, is engagement, retention, and performance. A lot of times we think of HR policy and we think, we're getting, handcuffed by all of this, the laws and the legislation, but there is a good middle ground that we can find to be able to, again, marry that policy and culture. So first and foremost, of course, as mentioned, we have to define our culture and articulate our values. What do you stand for as an organization? What do you expect of your employees? How are you carrying that out through the entire employee experience? And then when we can align policies with both what we need as an organization and what the employee needs, we can create that clarity and trust and stronger engagement. And by the way, that's going to equal stronger productivity, stronger creativity, stronger loyalty, stronger everything. So a culture-driven system also recognizes that fair does not always mean equal. So the consistency is going to be coming from what your shared values are and what you believe, but not the rigid rules. People are everyone's looking for something different these days. But if we can keep that, steady ground of our values as the consistent part and kind of fluctuate with the individual, we're still being fair. So again, if we replace those strict policies with clear, flexible guidelines, we as leaders and business owners can apply our own judgment and have some wiggle room while maintaining, that accountability and also being compliant. So a few examples of this, just to bring this down to the ground here, is, we can offer flexibility. Let's say you have someone on a Family Medical Leave Act, and again, this might be for a little bit larger organizations, but if maybe you do a phased return or you think beyond the FMLA legislation, maybe you can give them a little extra support. Now, on the flip side, if you're a small business and you're not yet eligible to have to provide FMLA, perhaps you consider doing so as doing the right thing for your employees. So just thinking outside of the box there. Perhaps this is defining a PTO policy, which many of you have, but ensuring that your leaders actually take time off and model the behavior, because it's one thing to have a policy, it's another thing for people to believe they can actually use it. Another example are core office hours, so that you have the standard times that people need to work, but then allowing some remote or in-office flexibility, also focusing on the outcome versus the amount of time someone is sitting in their seat. And that is going to make employees feel like they are respected and the organization still staying compliant. So think about it this way: the policy sets the rules and tells the people what they're entitled to, but the culture determines whether the employees feel safe, whether they feel encouraged to use those policies. And this is where, if you're in an HR role or if you're just thinking about the HR function in general, this is where HR stops becoming the rules police and becomes the business partner. It's being able to work in that gray, still being compliant, but doing the right thing, for the employee and for the business. Okay, another topic we wanted to touch on that is getting a lot of attention with our current clients here is compensation benchmarking and benefit strategies. Again, looking at the retention piece of the employee experience. So compensation and benefits, as you know, work together to strengthen your competitiveness, employee motivation, and employee engagement. Compensation benchmarking is when we compare that internal compensation data to the external market to make sure that we are identifying gaps and making sure that we're competitive. And so this process, which we recommend on an annual basis, helps us attract and retain talent while supporting fair, informed compensation decisions. And when employees know that we're paying attention to, or that you're paying attention to this by either involving a third party to conduct the compensation benchmarking, or you yourself doing an objective review of compensation every year, they feel valued. They feel reassured that their compensation is being managed thoughtfully and competitively and fairly. So if you're not currently doing this, or you're just doing it willy-nilly or one-off situations as you hire people, we recommend that you do this in a more formal way and that you let your employees know that you're doing that in a formal way. Benefit strategy. Benefits are also a key part of total compensation, and we definitely want to make sure that we're highlighting everything you're doing from a benefit situation. We also want to evaluate whether our benefit offering is competitive, and that it's a good addition to everything you're offering from a cash and compensation standpoint. And you can use your benefit broker, you can use outside consultants to do this as well. Having a strategic compensation structure to motivate employees is important, and this is another great example of where you can combine the consistency of using parameters to ensure equitable compensation, but having the wiggle room to really reward your high performers. So thinking intentionally about that compensation structure is important. An item we definitely see does not get enough love is the total compensation statement. So if you're not producing a total compensation statement when you do your annual review process, or if you're not taking that compensation annual review and presenting things formally or in some sort of way that works for you. Some of you may not want it to be overly formal. We get that, but this is a really great opportunity to lay out, here's what we are paying you, here's how we're bonusing you if that applies, and then here are all the things we're doing for you from a benefit standpoint and putting dollar amounts to that. We have found that when we offer total compensation statements, our employees will take them home to their spouses, to their parents, to others, and say, look at everything they're doing for us. So this is a really important tool, and it's really pretty simple, doesn't take a lot of time. but it has a great impact. In this, you can highlight non-financial benefits, which are important. And our last point here is it's really important to make sure your benefits are marketed year-round. I think most companies have a tendency to talk about their benefits one time a year during open enrollment. And that's very important, but if you're doing a lot for your employees, you're going to want to do that a lot more often. And there's some different ways to do that, but you want to maximize, their awareness and appreciation for what you're doing. And again, it's a competitive market out there. So we want people to know actually what is available. It's very easy to forget what benefits you have.
Yes.
So if it's only once a year. So for example, just posting this on the intranet, if you have an intranet, or if you have in your break room, if you have a bulletin board, just posting different, did you know that our healthcare offers, this particular wellness benefit, or, maybe you have that total rewards or total compensation statement. Perhaps you have a newsletter or a weekly announcement of some sort, office-wide email, a all-office meeting. These are some places where you can discuss what you're doing from a benefit standpoint.
Alrighty, we are now going into one of HR's most, I would say, commonly asked questions, and one topic that can be sometimes not the most exciting to discuss. So that is documentation. As most of you are wearing the HR hat at your organization, whether it be a small business in the form of a business owner, or if you are in the finance space, or even an HR director, there have likely been moments when you have wanted to move forward with a decision, but didn't have the documentation at your hands to support your move. Sometimes those can just be a gut instinct, but having that documentation is really an incredible asset to making those decisions down the line. So we're going to move through the next few slides in the lens of an HR perspective, and offer a few practical recommendations for how to go about documenting. Before we recommend you take any action to what to include in documentation, what not to include in documentation, we ask you to consider the question, is this a trending or one-time occurrence? Is it a rule or is it an exception? If the situation is trending or a pattern, perhaps there needs to be more of a coaching conversation, a long-term plan for how to go about addressing an employee's behavior, ensuring that you are documenting that initial conversation, as well as those follow-up conversations and coaching conversations is something to take note of. If it's a rule or an exception, however, you may just want to offer an employee discussion for maybe it's just a quick check-in. Talk to the employee and ask them, hey, how are you doing? Sometimes just that question of how are you doing? And is there anything we can do to support you? Sometimes that's all that it takes to really understand why an employee may have made a decision that did not result in the best outcome. Compliance forms, personnel conversations, and feedback forms. These are all components of what documentation typically looks like in a more formal way. Emails, Teams messages, those can all be included in that scope of documentation. Writing down items after discussions in a simple Word document, in OneNote, all of these serve as different forms of documentation. And so really, at the end of the day, documentation is up to you in how you go about executing it, in particular for these employee relations conversations. When clients come to us asking questions, again, we have commonly run into the question of, I want to move forward with this decision. And we ask them, why do you want to make this decision? And do you have any documentation? And so really we emphasize that consistency in how you are documenting and that you are documenting. This is going to prevent any disputes that may arise down the line. And it also supports accountability. You are setting those expectations up front. And so as you have these conversations, you are really holding the employee accountable. And as you document, you're holding yourself accountable in the work that you are doing as a manager. So by having that conversation, again, setting the expectation, resetting the expectation, ensuring that after that initial conversation, you are following up with an email to document what was said, This again could take place in the form of a Word document as well, but just writing down the common who, what, when, where, why, those questions on all employee relations conversations. Sometimes that may want to be placed in an employee's folder, depending on the situation. However, it can also just be stored in your personal space or wherever you store any notes. As you document, we want to remind you that all of these discussions and documentation should stay on a need-to-know basis. Ensuring that the employee's information is staying confidential is incredibly important and really goes back to the integrity that you have, but also the integrity of the organization. Your employees are going to be talking, and so as you make sure that that information is confidential, you are setting your organization up for success down the line there. Right in tandem with documentation and what to document, there are also several federal agencies that outline how long certain documents should be kept. So we've compiled a list here of some of the most commonly asked questions related to documentation we ask, as well as some that are more timely than others. Starting out with that Form I-9, all Form I-9s should be kept 3 years after the date of hire, or 1 year after separation of employment, whichever is later. In tandem with I-9s, we also encourage you to use E-Verify throughout that process if you do not already. E-Verify is an added layer of employer protection in verifying employees' eligibility to work. And some states, such as Alabama and Arizona, do require the use of E-Verify for those employees. If you do opt to use E-Verify, it's something that needs to be used for every employee from here on out. It cannot be used exclusively for certain employees. Interview notes are another commonly asked question we received regarding how long do I need to keep them for. So the EEOC says that you should keep interview notes for 1 year and 2 years if you are a federal contractor. Employee relations conversations, again, should be kept throughout the duration of employment, plus an additional year if they are involuntarily terminated. That's outlined again by the EEOC. Ensuring that you have those basic 5 questions of who, what, when, where, and why, and how in that form of documentation for personnel and employee relations conversations is going to provide any information that may be needed down the line in the event of any conflict. Medical information is one of the most highly requested topics that we ask or are asked for advice on. So all medical information is determined by OSHA. And so medical information should be kept for the duration of an employee's employment plus an additional 30 years. Also, we want to ensure that you know that medical information should be stored outside of an employee's personnel file. There should not be any overlap between what's included in their personnel file and any medical information. So ensuring that you have a few layers of security on both the personnel files and medical information is another thing to consider as you go about document retention. Lastly, OSHA 300 logs. I bring this up as it's a timely matter. OSHA 300 logs should be kept for 5 years after they initially need to be posted. These do not apply to every organization, especially smaller organizations, but we would encourage you to check to make sure that if you are above that threshold, that you do have those OSHA 300 logs posted. At this time, we're going to take 1 to 2 minutes for those that need CPE credit to answer this poll question, and we will be back in a few. Awesome. Welcome back. We hope that you were able to just grab a quick drink there, and we're going to dive right back in. So we're really, as you I'm sure can tell by now, we are going on all sides of the spectrum here.
Yeah.
So anywhere from, we just finished up document retention, and now we're going to shift into some of the more soft and human skills of communication, feedback, and accountability. These are three topics we are continuing to see training requested on more and more and more. And so they we figured we'd include them in the presentation today to give you a little bit of insight into how they impact your organization. We're going to start by touching on the importance of strong communication. Strong communication lays the foundation for what a successful team looks like. By having strong communication, employees and teams build trust with one another. What we say, how we say it, and how we respond, these are all direct components of the impact of communication. Strong communication also prevents and resolves conflict. By having strong communication and understanding how your employees and teams communicate, this really helps in preventing and resolving any misunderstandings that can arise. Conflict is not always a bad thing, and so being able to understand how you are communicating with your employees is a great insight into how your own conflict on your team can drive innovation and how it can drive decision making down the line. Again, I've said it a couple times, but it helps build strong teams. Really, if you are able to understand how your team communicates, it really helps foster a lens and a culture of collaboration. Collaboration is one of the biggest drivers of innovation as well as conflict. And so, again, if you know how your employees and your teams are communicating with one another, you're able to have those more innovative ideas and decision making down the line. Lastly, strong communication really increases engagement and improves productivity. When employees are clearly understanding their roles and expectations, they feel more confident, they're more engaged, they're more motivated in their work. McKinsey has found that teams that communicate well can boost their productivity by up to 25%. And so as you go about the rest of your day, the rest of your week here in a little bit, we encourage you to pay attention into how your employees are communicating with one another. Are they aware of any habits in particular that may direct them down the line? But again, it all goes back to communication. If you have strong communication, then you're really able to foster a culture of clarity, which we've talked about again and again. Clarity really helps foster is employee engagement and productivity down the line. Absolutely.
I am a big believer that communication is the secret sauce.
Yes.
It's the secret sauce to a strong culture always.
Yep.
Because all of the topics fall under the umbrella of communication, including effective feedback. And of course, again, this is an important piece of clear communication. It directly impacts performance and engagement for our employees. Gallup data has found that 80% of employees who say they have received meaningful feedback in the past week are fully engaged. And this is amazing to hear.
It is.
Unfortunately, humans are not always great at giving difficult feedback. And there was somewhere along the line, feedback has gotten a negative connotation. But of course, we can't grow ourselves. We can't grow our businesses. We can't grow our own selves. We can't grow our employees without it. And so we really need to continue to flip the script on what feedback is, what it means, how people receive it, and follow Brene Brown's lead. And that is to be clear, is to be kind. And if you are in our webinars, I probably quote that quote every time because feedback is a hill I will die on. And that is so important to the organization. So let's talk about some tips that we have here and reminders for many of you. But effective feedback is timely and regular. And it's not something to just save for an annual review or a 6-month review, but really think of using a coaching style and teaching your employees and managers in particular to use that coaching style. I always think about, for those of us that were in athletics or any sort of activity, we didn't get coached one time a year. we got coached constantly. Go a little bit this way, try this, do this. It's a constant guiding. And, this may not be the right thing to say, but I'll say it. Sometimes it feels like hand holding. And that just goes back to the clarity. There is just much more clarity needed for all levels, for all ages these days, because of the weight of all the information we have. So yes, it is going to take a little more time, but it will be worth it to be able to coach and guide like that. It'll help prevent small issues from becoming bigger problems. We want to make sure that feedback is clear and specific, so employees understand what is working and what needs to change. Vague feedback really does not drive improvement. And we have a lot of clients that say, I just don't understand why they're not performing. And our question to them is, do they know what that means? Have you communicated? Have you let them know what your expectations are in a clear way, in a consistent way, and more than one time? And so that is something to ask yourself if you are dealing with any performance challenges with employees. Focus on facts and observable behavior, not personality or intent. And this keeps that feedback objective. It's not only easier to receive that way when it's factual, it is also easier to give when it is factual, because we don't second guess, if we're being fair, because we have seen something observable. Remember that empathy matters, and practicing active listening helps employees feel heard and respected, even if that feedback is difficult. I've mentioned before, one of my first bosses told me, just be direct, but be kind. And anytime you're being kind, hopefully it is coming across that you are getting feedback because you care. It is part of your job as a manager or a leader to give that. Using a constructive tone and language, of course, it's not always what we say, but how we say it. And this can lead people toward growth versus defensiveness. We want to keep our feedback with a limited focus. Sometimes we have a million things we want to tell someone to work on, but kind of narrowing that down to 1 to 3 things to give them that focus. And when they can get over those humps, then you can go back and give them more to work on if that is the case. We want to tailor the message to the individual and understand how someone best receives feedback. That can help increase that clarity, that trust, and impact. And remember, if you could star this one, remember to praise. You think of feedback as constructive, but feedback is also praise. People need to understand what do they do that they should keep doing, and how should they do that just continue to enhance their role. As you can hear, we really like Gallup's research.
Yep.
We think that it's very grounded. So Gallup says our studies reveal that employees who receive consistent recognition are up to 45% less likely to leave after 2 years. There are a million stats that show that if we can recognize and praise, employees are more engaged, and praise does not cost anything. So it is a really not always easy for people either, but it's very important. All right. So for those of you that were on one of our previous seminars or webinars that we did it on accountability. This slide may look familiar, but we thought it was worth repeating due to the attention that accountability is getting. We are seeing and experiencing ourselves that after the pandemic and all of the labor market craze, that a lot of clients and businesses are kind of trying to pull that pendulum back, to reset expectations with employees, to hold people accountable, and to kind of tighten up some expectations that they've had that got a little loose. So we want to talk about accountability. And again, workplace accountability is that shared understanding that individuals and teams are responsible for their actions, their decisions and outcomes, and that expectations are clear, measured, and followed through. In a healthy workplace, accountability means, again, that we have clear expectations. People know who owns the result. They know what done means. They know what the completion of a project means. People follow through. There are constructive responses to issues. If things go awry, the response from leadership is, what did you learn? Not any sort of punishment. And there are some consistent consequences, or at least behaviors rewarded consistently. I really like this article by Diane Hamilton from Forbes that she discusses 2 approaches to workplace accountability. And the first is threatening. And using this approach is not what we're recommending. So I think you can guess that. But when leaders create kind of this fear-based culture where they reprimand for mistakes or failures. And that creates a culture of blame. And when they think, well, I just need to hold them accountable, and put their feet to the fire and, kind of having that mentality. If we can flip that and take the approach that accountability is a worthy challenge for our employees and think about having a growth mindset. Instead of focusing on mistakes and failures, the growth mindset encourages learning and improvement from these experiences. And so this is really what we're inspired, or we should be inspired to do, because then the individual that's going to choose accountability versus us kind of feeling like we're forcing it on them. Absolutely. Right. Okay. So let's see. How do we do that? And gosh, that's in all of our day-to-day actions. So these are just a few reminders and ideas for some best practices. But one, and man, we are like a broken record here today, aren't we? Clearly lay out expectations and do it often. And we always quote the, 5 to 7 times that people need to hear something.
Yes. Yep.
And some of you may be rolling your eyes, and I know I have too. That seems like a lot. How in the world do we have enough time to do that? But it is true. Saying one time during the recruiting process or one time during onboarding, that it needs to be a lot more than that. And their job is going to shift and the organization is going to change. So reviewing those job descriptions and, talking through that at your meetings is important. Tying work to measurable outcomes and using specific goals, whether it's different KPIs or deliverables or just milestones, and reviewing progress frequently and regularly, not waiting for those annual reviews to tell people kind of how far we are along the timeline. Provide timely feedback so people know how they're doing. We just went through that. Establishing open lines of communication. This may be in regular check-ins, which we'll talk about in a sec. Keeping your doors open, having online channels like Teams or Slack, or place where people can stay connected. Because again, not only are we talking about people that work in the office, but we know recognize a lot of you have remote employees as well. So speaking of scheduling regular check-ins to discuss progress, challenges, and feedback, it's likely that many of you are doing that. But if you are not, we highly encourage that you have this consistent interaction, even if it's 15 minutes. We've shared the statistic before that Gallup finds that a manager having one meaningful conversation per week with each team member develops high-performance relationships more than any other leadership activity. So if there's any place to focus your attention, and by the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning, we're throwing out a lot of ideas. Yes. And as a small business, chances are you may not have the resources to tackle them all, nor would you want to. So we're just suggesting that you find a couple of things that really have impact for you. And this is one of those. Managers have or supervisors have an incredibly important responsibility and role. And so this is, again, something other than time, doesn't cost a lot of money for them to do, but it's a great check-in. It also is a great way to open the door for feedback and knowing that you have that opportunity. And finally, leveraging project management tools can be helpful to help track tasks, projects, and deadlines, especially after you've delegated, to keep an eye on where they're at and hold people accountable to those deadlines. All right. And last but not least, we have exiting best practices. And I personally think this is a stage of the employee experience that we're not as intentional about, but should be. We should treat it similar to how we're treating onboarding, because it has a lot of impact if we do it right. And that effective exit begins with clear documentation, as Luke was talking about, to support our decision making. When we have done our due diligence to document where we've needed to, we can feel good that we have done our side of the street, or that you can as the employer. The employee will feel, hopefully, that it has been a fair process for them, or that they at least understand why there is an exit. I'm talking termination. We hope your exits are more retirements.
Yes.
Or promotion, exit from a certain role. But we know that most of the time it is terminations. So using a standardized exit process is really important, and that can help you reduce legal risk and increase your efficiencies. And so making sure that you are using a strong and solid termination checklist, and you're doing that for each employee, that's going to help you to just be more efficient with the process. We encourage you to provide next steps for the employee after the conversation. And this may mean outlining what to expect related to benefit transition, final pay, access, timing, where they get how they can get their personal belongings, just laying it all out for them very clearly, because that is if you have decided to term, that is a tough process. In most cases, there's a lot to digest. So not only having the exit conversation, but having a follow-up that is written can be very helpful for people to kind of just take a deep breath and get through the emotional aftermath of what has gone on. Conducting exit interviews, I think this gets missed a lot of times because people are thinking, oh no, someone left and now I need to hire someone else. But if you can conduct that exit interview or even an exit survey or both, that can really help you understand why people are leaving and, help hopefully prevent some of that from happening with future employees. So this is something that we encourage you to take seriously. And also it gives the departing employee a chance to put some closure to the situation and feel like they were given some time by you to feel better as they exit. If you can provide transition resources such as references, of course, that's only if it makes sense. Perhaps someone is not great for a specific job in your organization, but they'd be great for something else. You can always tell them, I will give you a reference for this particular type of, industry or role. Just be very clear with them so they know what to expect there. Job search support, benefit, guidance, this is all going to reinforce your respect for them and your professionalism as they exit. And ultimately, the goal is to handle exits in a way that reflects our values and creates advocates. The best thing that can ever happen is that people will exit and say, that maybe wasn't right for me. But hey, friend, this might be right for you. And they treated me really well as I went out the door. So this is something to put a little time and intention to if you're not doing that already. Anything you would add on this?
No, I was gonna say over communicating too. It may feel like you are over communicating some of these things, just the bare basics. But sometimes just providing that basic information can really have a large impact for the employee in understanding what they can expect coming next.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we covered a lot of different topics. HR 101, that's tough in an hour.
Yeah.
So hopefully that you have maybe gotten a few new ideas. We do have a few more minutes for questions. If there are any that have come through, feel free to put them in the chat. Yes, there is a question about the slide deck, and we are sending that out. Yes, that will be sent out. Is it recorded? Yes, yes. So we'll be sending that out to you, and that will come out today, I'm told. So that's great. If you have any specific questions that you'd like to email us on to, feel free. We'll wait just a couple seconds here if anyone has any other. Oh, are we taking for doing? Carol, do you mind typing your question? I was not specific on that. I apologize. Specific items do you recommend be on the exit checklist you mentioned? Yeah, good question. Well, I assume you're talking about the termination checklist, right? Okay, so all sorts of things. Let's take a communication to your organization. Do you communicate exits? We recommend that you do. People all of a sudden don't see John sitting there, they're going to wonder what the heck happened. And you don't have to be specific. It's an employee situation. So even just John is no longer with us. His last day was today. If you have any concerns about any sort of transition, let us know. You have all the logistical aspects of collecting equipment, collecting technology, collecting key cards, codes, security. Definitely security is something that you're going to want to make sure that you are on top of.
Yep.
Know what's going on there. Your benefit transition is going to be one where you want to figure out, how much PTO do they have that I am going to need to pay out. Perhaps you are considering a severance agreement that you would like to offer them. So you'd want to get that written up. You want to talk about how those benefits transition and make sure you have all your ducks in a row. for that conversation. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
What
I
else would
think
you-
technology is really the biggest thing.
Yeah.
There's so many elements of technology in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of
Yeah.
things. And so
There are.
working directly with the supervisor for any access to systems,
Mhm.
if there are any processes that this employee in particular was working on that nobody else knew about, collecting that information that was just kind of being stored in their own head.
Yeah.
That's a really critical element in terms of transitioning an employee out of the organization.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think if you have a strong onboarding process,
Yep.
just invert that.
Yes.
Because everything you needed to do to get them ready, you will need to undo to exit them.
Yes.
And,
Right.
you know, just like you interviewed them, and, interview them on the way out.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's probably a good way to do that. Thank you for the question, Danielle. Erin, if your supervisor does not do these, how do you get them to grasp these concepts? That's a great question. And I guess what comes to mind is training. I think one thing we're noticing is that there's not a lot of training that people are doing for their supervisors and managers. Often we take a technical expert, we pull them into a manager or supervisor position, but that is a very different position to be in. And so we don't always teach them many of these concepts of how to handle people. I'm not sure if you have a specific, concept, but if you're talking just in general, is that
Yeah.
what would you say, Liz?
Absolutely, and I
Yeah.
think if you are meeting with the supervisor themselves, if in a check-in
In general.
and
Yeah.
in a check-in meeting too, if the supervisor has a direct manager that they're also reporting to, just inserting some of those concepts in those initial conversations, that is also going to give them a hint to
Yeah.
maybe do this with their own employees. Again, it goes back to kind of expectations and
Mhm.
saying, this isn't a nice to have, this is a must because it's going to help us in XYZ ways.
Yeah.
And so having those ongoing conversations in general with the employee is another way that you may go about that one.
And I think sometimes we have to present it. Why would you want to do things like this? Why would you want to document? Well, when you get to the point where you're ready to term someone, it's not easy sitting across the table from someone. So if you can let your supervisor know that if they do this, that process is going to be easier for them. Or if they give their employee feedback, they're going to see strong performance. If they do many of these things, they're not going to have the type of turnover and have to reteach the people that have been there.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
great question. I know that can be hard. You're welcome. Last question here. What kind of documentation would you like to see if someone were to no call, no show, and ultimately terminate themselves, but then in return file unemployment? Well, good question. I may email you afterwards, Jennifer, if that's okay, just for the sake of time here. But I think I would document exactly what you said, no call, no show. I think then for the unemployment form that you need to fill out, we can give you some tips for how you might want to write that out. With, that's all.
Yeah, I was
I'm gonna email you, Jennifer, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for asking the question, but that's interesting. I hope that's not happening to you a lot too. So, but we're seeing a lot of strange things in today's, employment or in today's workforce. So, well, with that, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We hope you'll join us for future webinars and reach out to us if we can be of any assistance to you. We'd love to support you from a people aspect. Thanks so much. Have a great day.